Though I'm a relatively new dad, I'm really looking forward to the time in the future where I'm able to pass on my love of video games to my child. And honestly, I think you gotta be at least like 3 years old before you even start to have meaningful input on the games that are being played. I think that was about the age that I started playing with my dad. But beyond that, otherwise, maybe they're just able to at least watch when they're a little bit younger. Because this is something I have early fond memories of doing with my dad back on our Windows PC. But I think the best system, if you want to get your kids into video games and even play some video games yourself as a busy parent, is definitely the Nintendo Switch. When I bought mine 3 years ago, I didn't really think of it in that way. In fact, I bought a specific one with a specific serial number strictly for the purpose of modding it and being able to do a ton of other things with it, being able to play homebrew software, games from older consoles via emulation. But what I ended up finding was I actually enjoyed the Nintendo Switch just the way it is. I enjoyed playing the Nintendo Switch games, and there's a limited library, sure, of older titles available via the Nintendo Switch Online membership, but I really just enjoyed the Nintendo Switch games. And I'll get into why I think that is later in the video, but the library here of Nintendo Switch games is something that I really appreciate because I think it stands out in comparison to other platforms. Sure, my Xbox has access to some kids games or E-rated games or games that are just overall acceptable for a broader audience, but where you really see that is on the Nintendo platforms. I think that's a well-known fact, but it really hits home here with the Switch. When you compare the library of games available on the Switch to something that like the Xbox, it seems like these games are a lot more child-focused, but there are older titles available. Take something like The Outer Worlds, Disco Elysium, Fire Emblem Three Houses, just looking at some of the titles that I have on my system, that they do hit older demographics as well, but there are plenty of kids-focused titles that I think are great for the entire family. And considering all the horror stories I've seen hit mainstream news and just overall my personal experiences growing up with the internet, I feel like this is something that I kind of have to approach with a bit of caution when I open my child up to the world of the internet. And when you give them a device like this, you do open them up to that type of experience, but I think that you can really limit that with the Nintendo Switch. That also plays into some of the benefits of why I think this is a great system and a rare one in the modern day, and that's the fact that it's very functional without online capabilities. In fact, my Nintendo Switch, I rarely ever connect to the internet. Now, that's because I have a modded system, and doing so opens me up to some other issues, but even my regular Nintendo Switch, my unmodded one that my wife uses, we don't actually use online all that often. And because the games are designed with an offline point of view in mind, because this is a portable system, these games rarely seem to come bogged down with the overabundance of day one updates and microtransactions that kind of plague modern gaming. Of course, they're there. There are definitely some titles that are like that. In fact, there's some Ubisoft titles, maybe some 2K titles that release with day one patches necessary, or even with just download codes for parts of the game inside the case on physical copies. But the majority of these games, I feel like, are wholly entirely in a playable state on the cartridge, which is something that you don't see on the other two major platforms in the Xbox and the PlayStation. So if you're concerned about handing a Switch to your 6 or 7-year-old child and thinking you're going to somehow drain your bank account because your credit card was one time linked to your Nintendo Switch account, or you're worried about who they're going to meet online, or something to that nature, you can avoid that concern entirely by just operating the system offline, which is something that wasn't a novelty in the way that it is with the Switch back when I was a kid. My Game Boy didn't connect to the internet. I didn't have a Wi-Fi adapter for it. I had a LAN adapter, to do some wireless trading with friends, but the likelihood that one of them even had one of those or having a link cable at the ready, we didn't do much interconnected play on our portable handhelds, and when we did, it was with somebody that was near us. That was just the way that I grew up, but I feel like you're able to replicate that really well with the Nintendo Switch. I mean, I grew up with a PlayStation 2 as my primary console throughout the majority of my childhood, and I did not play games online on my PlayStation 2 because I think a small majority of PS2 owners actually did that. So if you want your child to be able to replicate that experience in the early days of their gaming career, while they're maybe 5, 6, 7 years old, you can definitely do that by just having a Nintendo Switch that's simply not connected to the internet. Beyond that, it's obvious the Nintendo Switch is a very versatile console. It can be played as a handheld, it can be played on your TV. You can play it with one person, you can play it with another person. It has that local co-op aspect, and the fact that right out of the box, you do kind of get 2 controllers. But if you are a parent trying to buy one of these for your child and you think 2 people will be playing this regularly, I would recommend buying another controller rather than just using half of a Joy-Con, because that's not ideal and it's not compatible with every game. Like I said, my child is very young, so I can't really speak totally from experience, but I'm going to give you a few titles that I think would be great even for, say, a 5-year-old playing the Nintendo Switch. I'm not going to include something like Pokemon, because I think the idea that that is a really young kids game is kind of incorrect in the nature that Pokemon has a lot of reading in it, and if you don't understand that, you're not going to get a good idea of the game, and being that it's inherently a one-player game, it's difficult for somebody else to tag along and kind of provide a helping hand there. So Mario Strikers Battle League is a recent soccer title released by Nintendo that I think is a ton of fun, and it's really only a few buttons that you have to get around learning, and if your kids are even playing recreational soccer by age 5, and maybe they are, they'll definitely find that one enjoyable. I think that the Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga could be a good choice, but you'd have to definitely have somebody playing with you, and it is a 2-player game in order for them to really get a good grasp of, I think, how to play and move through the levels, because there are some puzzles obviously involved there, albeit that they are a bit simple. Mario Kart would be a seemingly obvious choice in addition here, but I want to point out Team Sonic Racing, which I feel like is a really fun, little bit more complicated, but very enjoyable racing game that I think even young kids can get into. I know we gave this to my niece and nephew for Christmas last year. I know they've really enjoyed it. Then Just Dance, which is a game that's been going on, 15 plus years of iterations. It's a motion game that has you actually dancing to the music, and while of course the motion that's recording is only in your hand in the same way it was back in the day on the Wii Remote, it's definitely something that'll get kids up and moving and is very understandable. And then lastly, I don't think you can talk about the Nintendo Switch without talking about a Mario game. So Super Mario 3D World is, in my opinion, the best choice for a younger audience. I don't think Super Mario Odyssey or Super Mario 3D All-Stars are going to go very well with a young kid. They're just a little bit more complicated. They open you up to a larger sandbox to have to platform through, and I feel like in 3D World it's kind of defined in a smaller way that makes it be more acceptable, and I'm just trying to move from point A to point B to finish the level, and ultimately it's a game that's better suited for multiplayer, having multiple players locally playing on the same TV. So that's my thoughts on the Nintendo Switch today as a relatively new parent, and how I look forward to playing what's already really a 5-year-old piece of hardware with my child in a few years from now, when I still think the Nintendo Switch will be relevant. It's already kind of an underpowered piece of hardware, and yet new games continue to come out for it, and will seemingly continue to come out for it for years to come. It's just kind of beat the test of time in that way. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.